about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Today, we are pleased to have Paul Jacobs, who's the president of the Liberty Initiative Fund, a national organization helping citizens place issues on the ballot to hold politicians accountable. Believe it or not, fight crony capitalism and protect their liberties. Paul is also currently president and on the board of directors of Citizens in Charge, a nonpartisan group working to protect and expand voter initiative rights. Currently, Paul hosts Common Sense, an online and print opinion program, which I read nearly every day when I get a chance, which reaches tens of thousands of online readers and email subscribers. Paul also writes a weekly column for townhall.com, appearing each Sunday. The best way to assure freedom of expression, no matter where it may be threatened, Pulitzer Prize winner columnist Paul Greenberg wrote, would be to have an army of utterly determined Paul Jacobs fighting for it, and I cannot agree more. His writings have been featured in USA Today as well as many major news publications. He has appeared on numerous television programs as well as a guest on talk shows such as Liberty Talk Radio. Today, our discussion will center around asset forfeiture and the change in posture of law enforcement. Please do not call us today. We have a phone line problem, unfortunately, so we're not going to ask you to call in. We don't know what happened, but the lines went down on us at the very last minute. So please listen in and write in. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. We appreciate you listening in. Paul, thank you for being on our program.
Joe, always a pleasure.
Now, Paul, I'm going to drive off the paved road for a second and ask you something that we did not discuss and did not plan to do, but I died to hear your impression, your opinion of the Republican debate. Could you give us your take on it, please? And I'm sorry for throwing you a curveball, but
no, not at all. Last Sunday, my column at Town Hall was about the Democrats' super PAC. I think the moderators were pitiful, terrible. Not because they asked tough questions. In essence, they didn't ask tough questions about policy, which is what I think the public would like. They asked a lot of stupid questions, and they asked questions designed to create a food fight. And this is not the first time. I think maybe it was the worst instance of kind of the moderators taking over and creating a bad debate environment. But it certainly has happened before. And it strikes me, and I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, as you know, Joe, I'm a libertarian. Right. And I look for people who are honest and talking about reform when there's not a libertarian choice, whether they have an R or a D by their name or an independent. But it does seem that in the Democratic debate, there were not questions designed to create fights between them. And in the Republican debate, there is. So I was critical of the moderators. But I think that the biggest issue raised in the debate was when Marco Rubio called the mainstream media the Democrat super PAC. And not only does that point to the bias in the media, but I think it points to a really deeper issue about campaign finance regulation. The mainstream media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, NBC, ABC, CBS, have been, Associated Press, have been just tremendous cheerleaders for all kinds of campaign finance regulations, including supporting the constitutional amendment that was voted on last year about this time in the U.S. Senate, and an amendment that every single Democratic U.S. senator voted in favor of. The amendment at Senate Joint Resolution 19, thank goodness it didn't pass, but it would have repealed the words in the First Amendment that say Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech, and it would have replaced it with an authorization for Congress, the least popular group in America, to regulate campaigns and to regulate their opponents' finances. The measure was so sweeping, and of course, I'll get to how it was reported in the media in a second, but it's so sweeping that the authors felt the need to add a provision that said specifically it does not abridge the freedom of the press in the First Amendment. In other words, they gave Congress so much power that it could have been assumed that Congress also could start regulating the New York Times and the Washington Post,
right,
which they might not like too much.
Right.
And I think it's incumbent on all of us to realize when these major media outlets are campaigning to silence other people's voices, they are in a competitive situation where their ability to control how people think would be tremendously enhanced if all the other voices are muted.
Right.
And the way this measure has been reported in the press is it's dishonest. They have continually reported it as an attempt to get rid of the Citizens United decision, to overturn the Citizens United decision. Now, most people have never been given enough information in the media to know that that decision was about a movie that our government censored. In America, we don't have to ask if there are possible threats to the First Amendment. We've already seen a movie about Hillary Clinton censored and stopped from advertising on the public airwaves in the 2008 cycle. So we know our government can censor movies and has censored movies. The question is whether they would keep doing it. The Supreme Court said no. But in that constitutional amendment, there is not a word about Citizens United. There is nothing that changes that decision. They simply give Congress so much power that Congress could change that decision. But of course, it's all predicated as an attack on the court that's overstepped its bounds. Except if you read, which apparently nobody in the media can read. We should start sending volunteers into the ABC newsroom and the New York Times offices, teaching these people how to read, because it would really help their reporting. None of them have read it. It doesn't say anything about that, but it does instead give the court tremendous power, because it says that they could do any regulation, the Congress could, that was deemed reasonable. And of course, reasonable is going to be decided by the Supreme Court. So the same Supreme Court that they're saying is terrible and horrible, they're giving a tremendous amount of power. In the same way that they're saying corporate speech is horrible and terrible, but the massive behemoth corporations that own ABC, CBS, NBC,
right,
the New York Times, the Washington Post, not a word about them. Now, of course, my solution is not let's go after the media. My solution is let the folks in the media speak freely and let the rest of us speak freely as well.
Right. George Orwell must be laughing in his grave at this point. He must be saying, I told you so, I told you so, I told you so, right?
He is. Because part of people think about the telescreen and different things, the telescreen's going to be watching us, and turned out the TV, just got us to watch it. But Orwell's main point was about language and about publicity and the ability to mold opinion and to control the levers of information in such a way that the public wouldn't know what was going on and wouldn't have
right,
any ability to fight against that massive power. And we're not there yet, but it is constantly startling how close we are and how many people, and Orwell said this himself. Orwell pointed out that we have an awful lot of intellectuals who seem to embrace totalitarianism. In fact, at thisiscommonsense.com today, my commentary is about a Washington Post columnist who said the reason that Congress doesn't function, or at least the first two reasons of four that it doesn't function, is because they banned earmarks. And earmarks are needed to get people to vote the way leadership wants them to on tough votes. Meaning, come on, let's not have people, right, deciding on the merits. We need to be able to bribe, the leaders need to be able to bribe different members. And then their other complaint was that outside groups spent money, so that when leadership threatened to cut off somebody and to make it tough for them to raise money, well, here were these groups like the Club for Growth and others who might, broadcast something or advertise something that said good things about this member of Congress or other person. And so, in essence, the media mavens in Washington would like a system in which we had boss rule. A system whereby the leaders of Congress could just twist arms through money by either giving it or taking it away and control our country. And if that's the idea of reform in the media, I think we have to start reading some of the articles that they print with a different attitude.
Yeah. Well, what concerns me is that there seems to be, there has been this movement in the direction of government overreach, limited rights of the individual. Freedom of speech has been modified to a point where you have to be careful about anything that you say because it may be illegal or immoral or fattening. And I see this. I don't see this turning back. I see this just getting worse every year. For example, and now this is a little bit different analogy, but the Republicans were lambasting Congress, of course, the Democrats, and overreach in spending, and spending has to be put under control. But yet, when it came to the budget, the sequester, both the Republican-led House and the Republican-led Senate both voted to increase the debt ceiling, and based on what they voted on, it's projected that the U.S. current year's debt would be about $20 trillion when Barack Obama leaves his office. Now, I just listened to these guys on during the debate, and you would think it would have been a resounding no. We're not going to increase the debt. We're going to reduce it. We're going to cut a lot of stuff out. We're going to get rid of a lot of unnecessary. But everything that they talked about, the Republicans talked about that needed to be done, the exact opposite was done when it came to a vote on the debt. And I know this is a slightly different subject, but it's the same thing in a way. They say one thing, they do another, and because Orwell was so right in that we are so conditioned in believing what they say, whatever the last thing they say is, that's the right thing. The thing before, whatever they said before, doesn't count anymore. And no one's connecting any of the dots except for people like yourself.
Well, and look at the president. He said 16 different times in public speeches, no boots on the ground in Syria, no boots on the ground in Iraq. We've already had a combat-related fatality, not by mistake, but by American commanders on the ground in Iraq, sending soldiers into combat to shoot and be shot at. That's how it works. And then in Syria, we're now sending 50 special ops folks in.
Right.
And of course, not only is the policy, I think, completely brain dead because no one has come forth with an end game to how we actually succeed. It's all just kind of kicking the can down the road. And I think Obama, whenever it looks like the public's getting concerned that he doesn't know what he's doing, he ratchets it up. But why has he not gone to Congress to get a declaration of war, or at least one of these authorizations for the use of military force? And why has Congress done nothing? It's just pitiful from every vantage point. I happen to be a dove. I happen to think that we ought to get out of the Middle East, that we don't have a plan to succeed, and we ought to stop putting American men and women in danger of their lives when we don't have a clue what we're trying to even accomplish or any way to actually accomplish it. But the truth is, it doesn't matter whether you're a hawk or a dove or what your position is on the Middle East. You have to recognize that our policy doesn't make any sense. So and does the media come back and say, wait a second, how can you completely go against your word? No, there's hardly a word breathed in any of the publications or on television about that. And to jump back to what you were talking about with the Republicans saying we've got to cut government. Well, the whole battle within the Republican caucus in the House has been between folks like John Boehner and these radical folks who don't want to increase spending and who threaten the government and so on and so on. And of course, if you look at the presidential race, where are the Republican Party voters? They're with the folks who are trying to hold the line on spending. And so in essence, the media has already told you who the good guys and the bad guys are. The good guys are always those who want to tax you more and spend more money to do good. They want to spend money to free everyone in the Middle East, even though everyone in the Middle East, after we spent that money, is worse off.
Right.
They want to spend money to educate. And you look at, we've got to educate our kids. You look at the graph of spending on education. It has gone up, 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 up. Test scores have gone down, flat, down, flat, down, flat, down, flat. So, it just has no check ever, no reality check. They keep saying they're going to do flowery things. The media always says whoever wants to spend the most money is the most generous, wonderful person. And of course, we're going to get more government in a system in which basically a good part of the political party that says, hey, let's have limited government is lying to us. And the folks who actually want to hold the line are constantly demonized in the press. And then we have the folks on the left, the Democratic Party, who's always getting, treated with kid gloves by the media. Yep. And in fact, look at the situation with foreign policy and with war. That's the one thing that unites all the networks. Every single television network, Fox, all MSNBC, you name it, they all are in favor of U.S. foreign policy being engaged in every battle throughout the world. And frankly, there are times where we have to defend our freedom. I think there are two things to fight for. Fight for the land we live on and fight for the Bill of Rights. And those are the two things that, in 9/11, when the land we live on was threatened, they couldn't even scramble a jet. We are completely indefensible over here to any attack. Now, they've done new things to grab every email you've ever written and to know every post you've ever made on Facebook and to know every phone call you've ever made, or I shouldn't say ever, just the last 10 years, and to know all this information about every American, but they don't seem very good about stopping attacks and actually defending the homeland. And then, of course, look at the Benghazi situation. And I think Republicans, as usual, have misplayed everything. They want to blame Hillary Clinton as if those people being killed are her fault. The people who killed Ambassador Stevens and the other 3 Americans, they're the people at fault for those murders, not Hillary Clinton. But let's be honest, too. Hillary Clinton lied about it. She lied to the American people. The Obama administration lied to the American people. They lied for political, self-serving reasons. They didn't want their campaign theme in 2012 that they had vanquished terrorism to look silly. And so they lied to the media. And I think the media, they enjoyed the lie. They enjoyed telling the lie. They are still telling the lie. They've never been tough on her. And last week, Marco Rubio was right. And frankly, he's not my guy. I don't like his foreign policy. I have questions about other things. I'm not, he's not my biggest enemy in the world either politically. But I'm not saying this because I'm a big fan of Marco Rubio. But he was right. The mainstream media saw the same thing I saw, that Hillary Clinton was caught lying flat out about the cause of that attack in Benghazi. And what did they report? That she had a wonderful day, that she won the hearings, and that everything was peachy keen in Washington, D.C., and the rest of the American people should just kind of shut up and salute.
Yep, and we're all happy now.
That's right. Yep. That's right. Well, and she'll be the first woman president, right, which is going to be a wonderful thing. And I'd love to see a woman be president. I just like it to be an honest, decent woman. Right. Because there's a lot of honest, decent women out across the country who could serve as president. Hillary Clinton, frankly, is not one of them.
Well, I saw. I know you can't believe everything that you watch on these YouTube channels, but except for Liberty Talk Radio, you can believe everything we do here. But there was a documentary on Hillary Clinton, and all of the people that were in this documentary were notable people who, if they were lying, had a lot to lose. I mean, even from major news anchors to, which was surprising, and I won't mention any names, but everyone in that video was someone of was a public figure, and probably someone of above average wealth. If what they were saying was untrue, each one of those people would have sued to the hilt, and they would have made millions of dollars on each one of them. Of course, no one did, because no one wanted to defend the position, because if they did, they probably would have lost and made things worse. And I was shocked at some of the things that they said. These were even people who worked for Hillary who wound up in jail and served 5 and 10 years and came out and then spilled the beans. I mean, it was all after the fact. They had and everything to lose by saying this, and admitted what they did. But the only person that never admits what they did wrong was Hillary. That's the only one. This woman is absolutely I mean, you think Mother Teresa was a nice gal? Forget about it. I mean, Hillary is much well above her. And you just cannot believe all the shenanigans. You can't believe that all of these dozens of people are all lying and saying telling the same tune. It can't be. No.
Well, it seems to me too that when it comes to politicians, I tell people I came to Washington, the Washington area. I live safely outside the Beltway. I want everyone to know, but I came here about 20 years ago, and I thought I was pretty doggone cynical. But I've realized I've never been cynical enough for how bad it is here. And I expect politicians to spin, to maybe lie, to use statistics to lie even better. That's the sort of thing we kind of expect from politicians. We don't expect it from the media. And sadly, we have to start getting our cynical radar up and expecting it from the media. And I think the most disappointing thing about the last 8 years with Barack Obama are not the horrible, terrible things he's done, but the fact that the media has been in the tank for the president. They are not watchdogs, they are lapdogs.
Right, exactly.
And that's a huge problem. And a lot of it has been, even though Barack Obama couldn't be elected president without a lot of white folks, or at least they, who knows what's inside their DNA, but they look certainly Caucasian on the outside, walking into a voting booth and voting for him. And yet they've used racism. Anybody who disagrees with him on any issue is a racist.
Right.
And we cannot go another 8 years with any disagreement anyone has with Hillary Clinton, if she's president, being because they're sexist. And so I think the media will continue to, basically hide the news and spin it for the Democratic candidate. And, one of the nice things about having a Republican as president will be at least we'll get the media back as watchdogs, maybe for the wrong reasons, maybe for totally partisan, self-serving reasons, but I'd still like to have a media that's a watchdog.
Yeah. Do you think the Republican Party will be successful in dragging Ron Paul back in to run for president?
No, I think Ron is at an age in which he's had his run. I think his campaign not only was important at the time, but that campaign may make more difference in terms of getting young people excited and thinking about the issues of freedom and about calling out our foreign policy in a way that no other politician has been willing to do, pointing out all the bases we have all over the world, pointing out the fact that, when your policy doesn't work, you don't double down on it time after time after time. How often have we heard that the U.S. is indispensable? Well, look at what we've done in the Middle East. And look, honest people, good people can look at facts and decide different things need to be done. But where is anyone in admitting that our policy in the Middle East has been a failure recently It was a failure before that. It was a failure before that. We have built up dictators. We are now funding the American taxpayers, poor people working a couple jobs to make ends meet, are sending their money to an Egyptian dictator whose government fired with live ammunition on crowds that were protesting, killing many of them. I have kind of a rule. If a government fires with live ammunition on its own peaceful people protesting, that is not a government that the American taxpayer ought to be forced to fund.
But they're not only sending their money to the Washington, who in turn spends it on the military-industrial complex, but they're sending their sons and daughters who are coming back. Many of them, as Ron Paul had mentioned, I went to a conference in Austin, Texas, with Jacob Hornberger and that group, and got to meet all those people. It was wonderful. But
good folks.
Excuse me.
They're good folks.
Oh, they're fabulous.
Love Bumper or Jacob Hornberger.
Oh, fabulous folks. Absolutely fabulous. And Ron Paul mentioned that a little known fact: 35 people a day commit suicide who had served in the military overseas. And they not committing suicide because they're not happy with their wife and children, but because they cannot live with themselves what they were asked to do. And yet, no one's bringing that up at all. No one. And that's the real cost. And of course, those that don't commit suicide have to go to the Veterans Administration, costing millions of dollars in medical attention, and they're not even getting good help to start off with. So it just grows, and as it grows, it gets worse, and it gets more expensive, more convoluted, and people are looking to believe in something there's nothing to believe in. And I think that's why Donald Trump is doing so well. And everyone I speak to, they say, I don't agree with Donald Trump, but he's not part of the establishment, so I like him. I mean, that tells you how bad it is.
Well, they feel like he's not bought off by the powers that be. I'm not sure that he's not part of the powers that be, just coming from a different angle. But I certainly think that most of the folks supporting Trump are supporting Trump for the right reasons.
Right.
My father is someone who, growing up, was a tremendous believer, still is a tremendous believer in the free market, basically libertarian. And yet he would always say, we have to be careful about big business, because big business will do whatever makes them profits.
Right.
And when they're in league with government, I mean, one of the tragedies, why are we constantly fighting these wars that don't make sense? We don't have an end game, and people are getting their bodies blown apart. And when they're not getting their bodies blown apart, they are suffering, as you point out, for their whole lives with what we have asked them to do, which is just unconscionable. And yet, why does that policy continue? And I'm afraid that it continues because folks are making billions and billions of dollars on these wars.
There's no money in peace. There's only you and I prosper during peaceful times. The government does not. During war, you and I become expendable. Our money is withdrawn from us, and the military-industrial complex et al., they're making the big bucks. And a little-known fact, I mean, it's not advertised, that many of the troops in Afghanistan are not even our troops. They're contract people making $150,000 or more a year per person. I mean, why isn't this brought up during the debate? Well, I suspect because they're all war hawks, and they believe that a fighting America is a good America because we're the world's policemen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it sounds good and patriotic, and it really garners a lot of votes for them.
Well, and think about it. Instead of asking a question like that, they ask, if you become president, what's going to be your Secret Service code name?
Yeah.
Now, and first of all, if any of them had a clue, they would have refused to answer the question, because that's why it's a code name, because you're not supposed to say it on national television.
I would have answered Mickey Mouse and end it all, you know?
But with the limited time they have to ask questions of these candidates who are going to hold that powerful office, how on earth did they decide that's the type of question to ask? So, you know, we have a country that has tremendous military power, that has tremendous economic power, and that has a history of not being perfectly free. Let's not go back to what we had before. Let's get something better going forward. But that has had a tradition of belief in freedom and of people who will stand up and say, wait a second, I'm an American, you can't push me around, Uncle Sam. That sort of country being ruled by this elite in Washington of both parties, of big companies, and of, unfortunately, many in the Washington press corps.
Yeah, you know, Gerald Celente, my Goomba over there in up in Kingston, New York, he has a formula. He said, well, you have an economic crash. It's followed by a recession, which is followed by a currency war, followed by a trade war, and ends with a world war. And it's interesting because he has been talking about our involvement in the Middle East, in Syria, for a couple of years now, and he says we're going to encroach further and further. There's going to be an accident, and a world war somehow will develop, similar to World War I, where no one could really understand how all this started, you know? Well, you can see it formulating, you know, boiling, and why we put boots in the ground when the Russians seem to be doing an excellent job. They seem to be doing an effective job of handling things. And Syria is really close to their borders. I mean, it would be as if there was a problem in Mexico. We would help out Mexico. I mean, we wouldn't expect the Russians to come over to Mexico, you know, to fight some insurgents. But yet we go there, and then when the Russians step in, we're appalled. We go, how dare they go into Syria? And I don't understand. It's almost as if the American people are so ignorant. If they looked at a map, they couldn't pick out the United States on a map anymore, because they don't know where all these places are. We go 8,000 miles away, and yet, if someone came over here, it would be lights out. So we're past due on our break time, which we have to take, Paul. So I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you just for a second. But I wanted to end with that. But when we get back, Paul, I would like to talk on the subject that we said we were talking about, and that's civil asset forfeiture, something you never hear about, but it should be of concern to everyone. Please don't go away. We'll be right back. Thank you.
You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Political talk derived from a historical perspective. Not always palatable, but good food for thought. Pure libertarian talk with host Joe Cristiano. LibertyTalkRadio.com.
Express Test is your go-to company for on-site occupational health testing services. That's right, we said on-site. That means we will meet you at your facility for a free health and occupational safety consultation. Express Test specializes in hearing conservation, respiratory protection, and employee safety. We can help you establish viable programs tailored to your business and employee needs. For your free consultation, call 918-743-2929 or visit us at expresstest.com. That's 918-743-2929 or expresstest.com. Do you find yourself asking, what did you say? Aaron Cristiano of Ranch Acres Audiology has over 25 years of experience helping patients just like you.
Hearing requires conservation. We need to be aware and we need to be responsible for our own hearing health.
Understand more with a little help from Branch Acres Audiology. Call 918-749-7711. That's 918-749-7711 to learn more.
Steve Harden of the Harden Insurance Agency has over 30 years of experience designing family insurance protection, including retirement planning. Call 918-488-0024 or go to hardenagency.com and request a free in-depth estate and retirement evaluation. We look forward to earning your trust and helping you meet your life goals.
This isn't your typical talk radio show. This is Liberty Talk Radio.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Joe Cristiano. You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano. And with us today, we have Paul Jacobs. He's the president and the founder of the Citizens in Charge, I should say. I'm sorry, I lost that for a second, Paul. And we're going to talk about civil asset forfeitures. This is a subject that never comes up. I mean, it's this lost cousin somewhere, and it's an enigma, and no one knows really what it is, and no one talks about it. But yet, it directly affects the citizens' rights directly, and yet we never hear word one around. And I don't think anyone really understands it in the first place. Is my assessment correct, Paul?
It is largely. There have been, about a year ago, the Washington Post had a 5-part series about it. There have been some other media reports about it, but most people do not know what it is, and I'm gonna tell them what it is here in just a second. But it's been going on for many years. Civil asset forfeiture is where the government seizes your assets, alleging that those assets have either been involved in the commission of a crime or are the proceeds of a criminal act. If they convict you of a crime and take those assets and can show that those assets were indeed either the proceeds or involved in a crime, then I am 100% okay with them taking them. That's called criminal asset forfeiture. But what is increasingly happening, and has happened for years, is that the police are seizing things, and not just the police, sometimes the IRS and other government agencies. They're seizing people's stuff, their money in their bank account, their home, and not convicting them of any crime, not even charging them with any crime, just simply taking their stuff. And then they're saying, well, wait a second, we don't have to prove that your stuff was involved in a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. All we have to show is that the preponderance of the evidence is there. And of course, you have to hire an attorney to get your stuff. Now, many people have heard of, a couple owns a home, their 17-year-old son is discovered to be selling marijuana out of their home, and the police seize their home. That's outrageous, I think. The home obviously is not owned by that person. The government can't seize that home, but they've been doing outrageous things like that. What we're talking about is a giant leap worse than that. We have police who we've seen there have been films, Frontline, PBS did a documentary on it a decade or more ago, where they were showing the dash cam video of police, and they will stop some little old lady, and they want to search her car, they want to look for drugs, they find that she's out of town and she happens to have $300 in her wallet, and they just snatch that $300 and say that $300 was involved in drug trade, they think. Now, how does that woman get that $300 back? First of all, they had no reason to take it. But she gets it back by hiring an attorney and suing. Well, if they've stolen $300, she's out more than $300 when she hires an attorney and sues.
Right.
There was the case of the woman who had a lunch cart in New York City and was every day depositing $4,000, $6,000, $8,000 into the bank. There is a requirement that if you deposit $10,000 or more into a bank or withdraw $10,000 or more, the banks have to fill out all kinds of paperwork for the federal government. I think that's ridiculous, but that's the law. They then passed a law called structuring, making it a crime to purposely take out less than $10,000 or deposit less than $10,000. So the IRS says this woman is structuring, steals $60,000 out of her bank account without a shred of evidence that she actually is structuring, although that's kind of a silly crime to begin with. But of course, people might remember former Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, has just pled guilty to that because he was paying off somebody who had a lot of dirt on him from when he was a teacher. But anyway, this is the sort of things they're doing. And if you have the wherewithal to sue, you often get your money back. Of course, you're out your legal fees. But most people don't have the wherewithal to sue. And it really violates two very fundamental principles. One, it violates your property rights. Your car, your house, the money in your wallet, none of those inanimate objects have constitutional rights, but they're yours. And because they're yours and you have constitutional rights, the government can't just come in and steal them and say, hey, there's nothing you can do about it because your money or your house or your car doesn't have any constitutional rights. It's an insane violation of the basic concept of property rights, and it ought to be fought head on. It's also, of course, a violation of the whole concept of innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
You don't get to arrest people and throw them in jail and then say, well, if you can sue, then we'll let you out. You have to convict them of a crime, and the same thing should go for people's stuff. Right. And it's interesting because very few people know about this and understand what civil asset forfeiture is. It's 3 words. You get it from forfeiture, but you don't understand all the ins and outs of it. However, as it's explained to people, they are livid, and every poll I've seen is 70% or greater are against it. And then when you explain it to them, that 70% becomes more like about 90%. Now, the police who are putting some of these resources directly into their police fund so they can have a nice pool room or a new Coke machine or who knows what else, they support this and they're pushing back. Sometimes it goes to the prosecutor's office. Sometimes it goes into general revenue. And so you have politicians who'd like to keep that money, but the public is overwhelmingly against it. And thank goodness the legislature in New Mexico passed a law this year that ends civil asset forfeiture outright. But and you see the movement coming for more and more efforts to undo this. But one concern I have, Joe, and this is true not only for civil asset forfeiture, but things like police cameras. My organization, Liberty Initiative Fund, is working with folks in Ferguson, Missouri on a police camera initiative. And they already had police cameras even when the Michael Brown incident came up. And some people would say, well, Michael Brown, he was at fault from all the evidence, and the officer was justified. So why do you need a police camera thing in Ferguson? And I say, because we would have known day one that was the case. Right. Had the policemen. This isn't about getting the police or getting the public. It's about having the knowledge so that the policemen are protected and the public is protected. Right. And so I think it's critical that the public weigh in. Ferguson had police cameras, they weren't using them. After that incident, they started using them, but with no rules, only police policies, no mandate that they keep using them. And so the folks, citizens in Ferguson, wanted to mandate how they'd be used, that they would be used, and that certain privacy rights and certain transparency would be written right into the law. And I think that's critical. Plus, it's critical to let the people weigh in on these issues. In New Mexico, I worry that 3 years from now, 5 years from now, they have a budget crunch. The police unions are lobbying in the Capitol, and most citizens in New Mexico don't spend much time lobbying in the Capitol. They're busy, working their jobs and taking care of their families. And all of a sudden, they're going to change it. And the public won't be outraged because the public hasn't really been involved. And so my organization, Liberty Initiative Fund, we're on the internet at libertyifund.org. We are working with people around the country to put these types of criminal justice reform measures, which we call Protect Our Liberties, on the ballot for the voters to weigh in a representative democracy. And that doesn't mean we vote on every issue like what you're going to have for dinner, but it means that where government has a legitimate function, we decide things democratically. Let's do that. Let's go through that process because we need the public engaged and knowledgeable about this. Not only do we want them engaged so that if somehow the powers of, hey, let's steal your stuff, whether it's right or not, gain an advantage in the future and try to bring this stuff back, the public is engaged. But I also want the public to understand what went on here. I don't think police are all criminals. I don't think most of them are criminals. I think it's a rare case that the police are criminals. But I think if we have a system that rewards police for stealing people's stuff, that we're going to one day find that we have a police force that is primarily made up of criminals.
Right.
The incentives matter, and I think it's important for the American voter, the average voter, to understand that while police do a heck of a tough job, if we fall asleep and let them get away with things that are criminal, we're going to end up with police that don't protect us, but that steal from us.
Yeah.
And so it's the fundamental nature of government. This isn't a modern thing. Throughout all of history, if the incentives are that those in power can willy-nilly steal from you without any repercussions, guess what? We get ripped off a lot.
Yeah.
And so I think it's critical that this be a very public campaign. I know a lot of people out there discussing it. There are big foundations spending a lot of money, having a conversation about race. That's a good thing to have, having conversations about all kinds of other issues. But I say, let's end the conversations at some point, or at least let's put something on the ballot so that the conversations are followed by the American people weighing in and making intelligent changes so the same thing doesn't keep happening again and again.
Yeah. I guess I'm fortunate. I have not had any negative encounters with the police department. I've been stopped in fact, the few times that I've been stopped because I get off a highway going 60 miles an hour and I'm still going 50 when I should be going 40, I'm stopped. In most cases, they check my license and stuff like that. I said, sorry, you're right. I was just going too fast off the expressway, and they let me go. I mean, my encounters with the police department have been, quite frankly, very good. Now what concerns me is that my experience with the police, and I know plenty of police officers, and I asked them, I said, how often do you give tickets? And do you know how many that say, I never give anyone a ticket? I'll stop them, but I won't give them a ticket. I mean, it's amazing what you hear from them directly. And I know these people, they're honest, they're not lying to me. And what you see on television, you would think that everybody who wears a police uniform is ready to club you over the head, steal your wallet, all your personal possessions, throw you in jail without any rights to a due process whatsoever. And that's the impression that people have. Now, what I think exasperates this is that the police have been given all this armament and basically wartime outfits, and when they visit a house, someone in a house that may be suspected of doing something wrong, it looks like they're invading Normandy.
Yes.
And I think that exasperates it. I don't know why they do that.
I'll tell you another issue that exacerbates, the friction between the public and the police is the war on drugs.
Right.
We have now asked police not just to stop the guy with a gun who's robbing the bank, but to stop, who knows, 10%, 15%, 20% of the population that's using this substance or that substance, that's doing illegal, prescription drugs or marijuana. And basically, how do you find out they've done it? Well, you'd search their purse, or you'd search their car, or you'd search their home. That sort of law enforcement is so intrusive, and it's not the fault of the police.
Right.
It's the fault of legislators who pass these laws and then kind of dump it in somebody else's lap. So I think that's a huge part of the problem right there. My experiences with police have been, by and large, that they've been very, very good. Oftentimes they're certainly pushed by people. And I think this recent case, I think, is very difficult in South Carolina. You look at that video of the policeman overturning the girl's desk, and I don't know when we had to start putting police in public schools. It's not a good sign. But they have this policeman in the public school. He's called in because a girl is not doing what she's been asked to do, is being completely disruptive. He turns her desk over, which I guess you got to get her out of her desk somehow. But you look at it on video, it just looks horrible.
Oh, yeah, it was horrible, absolutely.
And yet, I think there's a real issue here as to whether or not he's been suspended from the force, but yet kids in that school 2 days later had a walkout in favor of the policeman. So this is a complex issue just because it's human interaction, and that's always complex. But it's not that the police are always terrible guys, and it's not that the police are always in the right no matter what. There are cases here in Montgomery County and Prince George's County in Maryland, right across from D.C., where they've had people killed in the jail, and the footage, the camera that usually works, was somehow mysteriously turned off, and nobody will testify about it. Now that's a level of corruption that permeates that police force, and that's a serious problem. So you can't paint with a broad brush. What do? Well, we can continue to blame one side 100% of the time or the other side 100% of the time, or we can do some things that would fix it. One, let's put cameras on police. These lapel cameras, they're not horribly expensive. They're a good thing to give people that sense that we're going to find out the truth. So let's not riot and burn down the city. Let's not blame one side or the other. Let's wait for the footage to come out and learn what we can learn. Won't solve every case, but it's a big help. Let's stop having police steal stuff from people and get to keep the proceeds. That's just who's for that idea? Very few people, and the people who are for it don't come on television to tell you why they're for it, because it's not a good reason. Let's get rid of things like that. Let's stop some of this policing for profit, especially things that cause poor people to go from poor to incarcerated. There are cases where somebody who's working a minimum wage job, they're young, they're trying to find their way in the world. You know, I was in that position. I know it was tough. I know if I had to pay a $200 fine at that point in my life, it would have been a heck of a lot of money. We're taking people like this who then can't pay the fine or scared to go to court. They miss the court appearance. Now they're incarcerated. They're fined extra. They lose their job. Let's have some sense of the fact that what we're trying to do is build a community and protect a community where we can all live together. This is not a gotcha. Everything is not a revenue stream. These are real people trying to make it in this world. So I think those three things, looking at policing and making sure that it's not for profit, it's for public safety, end civil asset forfeiture. Don't change this rule or that rule. End it straight out. You convict somebody, his stuff was involved in a crime, you take his stuff. You don't convict somebody, don't steal his stuff.
Right.
And then, let's also look at some of these policies that are, even if we have to means test tickets, and I'm not a big fan of means testing usually, hey, let's soak the rich, but let's stop soaking the poor.
Right.
And so these are all common sense things. We looked at our agenda at Liberty Initiative Fund after a colleague and I, and with a lot of input from other folks, kind of put it together. Holding government accountable, things like term limits, ethics reforms, pension reform. If you're promising a pension, why not put the money back to actually pay it instead of leave it to someone else? Fight crony capitalism. Let's stop subsidizing billionaire sports team owners by building their stadiums for them. Let's stop abusing eminent domain and pushing around the little guy so that a developer gets rewarded and writes a campaign contribution to some politician. And protecting our liberties, ending civil asset forfeiture and police cameras on police and that sort of thing. And we looked at that agenda, and as a libertarian, I thought, this is a 100% libertarian agenda. And then I thought, I don't have a single liberal or progressive friend who wouldn't agree on virtually every single item.
Right.
And then I realized all my conservative friends, whether they're more religious conservatives or economic conservatives, they're going to look at this too and say they're for it all. So, we talk about how divided we are, the partisan divide, everything's polarized. I don't think so. I think that is totally a function of politicians trying to divide us for their own benefit.
Right. I mean, they divide us on issues that really of little concern to us, or very, very little that we can do anything about. Those that concern us directly, that we can do something about, they don't want to discuss. And so it seems like we are all divided, but we're all on the same page, because I speak to people all the time about these things, and we're always in agreement. And I go, I wonder why we're arguing so much when we're in agreement. Do you think that the concept of private prisons has exacerbated the situation where prisons have to be at full capacity, or else the people who running them don't make the money? If they don't make the money, they're not going to give money back to the politicians during the campaign. You know, that whole cycle. It always bothered me that prisons are becoming privatized, because they can't. It's like having a hotel and no one showing up at the hotel to stay overnight. You want a full house constantly. Well, the private prisons, they want a full house constantly. So, geez, arrest somebody for anything. The guy threw a butt in the street. You know, give him 10 years. You know, we need the money. Right. Is there some of that, or what?
It's a big problem, and I don't have a philosophic problem with private prisons, but I have a practical problem, and that is I don't think they've worked very well, and I fear the ramifications. I like smaller government, but this is a function of government, and I think government ought to do it. For instance, in Pennsylvania, you had a situation where judges were getting kickbacks from the folks owning the private prisons to send people there. And young people, there were cases where young people who committed tiny offenses were being sent to these, reform school type prisons, and devastating their whole lives for nothing except to earn profit for both that judge and that private prison owner. I don't like that. But, the problem doesn't go totally away either if you have public prisons, which most of our prisons are still public, of course. In California, when a ballot measure was on the ballot to say first offenses for marijuana are going to get treatment, not jail, that measure was just fervently opposed by the prison union in California. Prison workers in California are making six figures.
Right.
And they didn't want their prisons to come up, half full or 3/4 full, because they might have to lay off some prison workers.
Right.
So this idea that, and this should be true across the board, so often the biggest funder of political candidates in America is AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. The biggest players are the folks who are in government, making money from government. And the biggest players outside of government are also folks who are privately making huge profits off of government. And I think the media does a terrible job of telling us about this.
Right. I like the old black and white movie, cowboy movies, and you had the town, and of course had the bar and the barber shop, and then it had the jail, and the jail always had one person in it. It was a town drunk. And it seemed with all this, there were no rules, no regulations, basically no law enforcement. Everyone carried guns, and the only guy that would wind up in jail would be the town drunk, but he was only there just to keep him off the streets for the night, and they let him go the next day. Why can't we return to that? I think of those. I said they probably had it right back then.
Well, they had some things right, obviously, and of course, the movies may have played it a different way.
Right.
But we can have a common sense judicial system, just like we could return to a common sense education system.
Right.
Where the little girl who brings a butter knife to cut her apple is not suspended and charged with some ridiculous crime. Where the 8-year-old who kisses a girl is not charged as a sex criminal and his entire life ruined.
Right.
If we get people together, we make sense. And where we make a mistake, we'll right that mistake. The solution is to get politicians out of the way. They've got to start working for us and us not working for them.
Right.
And what I mean by that is when they make a mistake, it's always somebody else's fault. And the solution is always to give them more money.
Right.
When the public makes a mistake, and there are times where the public's voted for something and 2 or 4 years later voted to repeal it because, hey, it didn't work. We have to make these decisions publicly together we're going to disagree. We're not going to like losing. But you know what? There's going to be another election. And that is a common sense system that works at all levels of government. And we've gotten away from it. And the way to get it back is to have some respect for our neighbors and to make a lot of these decisions that are legitimate government decisions at the ballot box, not by electing politicians who are trying to ride some gravy train.
Right. Well, Paul, we are just about well out of time. I want to thank you so much for being on our program. You are one of my favorite guests, and I hope you will accept our invitation to return at a later date.
I'll be there. It's always so much fun, Joe. I hope it's fun for the audience. I think it might be.
Yeah, it sure is. I'll leave you. If you want the last 30 seconds, I'll give it to you, okay?
Well, I would just ask people, in presidential years, so often one guy is going to solve the problem or another guy, and then America's all going to be fixed. It doesn't work that way. If the people listening don't get up off their couch and do something, America's not going to get better.
Right.
And so I ask you, go to thisiscommonsense.com and sign up, get my Common Sense e-letter that comes out 5 times a week, Monday through Friday. Go to libertyifund.org, where we're doing initiatives and helping people do initiatives. Go to citizensincharge.org, where we're trying to protect that initiative process. I have a lot of faith that the American people are good people who will solve problems where they're solvable. But if we rely on politicians, it won't work.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much for all that you do for all of us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Right. Thank you so much. Folks, this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well, stay tuned.